Hey guys, so this is going to be somewhat of an informal video. I couldn't find much in terms of videos online about Redux Toolkit, and if you already use Redux or you're learning Redux and you feel a little frustrated about how much boilerplate there is or how all the files are separated into constants and action creators and reducers, and you kind of have them all scattered about your development environment, Redux Toolkit is something that tremendously simplifies all of this and eliminates most of those issues that people have with Redux. The only problem is, for some crazy reason, not very many people seem to know about it, and nobody seems to be talking about it on YouTube. So that's why I'm making this video. So let's just jump straight into a code comparison real quick, because that's probably what you're most interested in. So I have this code that's from a real project that I was working on. This is kind of the older version of it, so it doesn't have some of the newer functions. But basically what I did was I took all of the code responsible just for Redux for one API interaction here. So it's called the Pokey API reducer. And what it does is it fetches data from the Pokey API, REST API, and it just stores it in state. So what the application does is really not important. What is important is the differences between how much code you're going to have to write and how many characters you're going to have to write doing just pure Redux. And so how I've separated it out is you've got your constants on the top here, which is typically in Redux, you have a separate file with a bunch of constants, named constants, and then you have another file with your action creators and your redux-thunks if you're using redux-thunk. And then you have another file for your reducers. And so I kind of just put them all in one file, just so that you can kind of compare how many lines of code and what it looks like. So the amount of code that you'd have to do just pure vanilla Redux is about 118 lines of code to get this up and running. And then if you use Toolkit, that goes down to 99. And that may not seem like a lot, but let's go ahead and talk about the character count now. So this function called get Pokemon details, which takes data from the Pokey API and grabs specific endpoints that I'm trying to target in my application. If we look down here, oh gosh, it's covered up. Let me hide this. So 786 characters. And if we go to that same function, get Pokemon details, in just pure vanilla Redux, now it's 851 characters. And then let's just go to this one. We'll look at get Pokemon names. This is a more simple one that just grabs the name of each Pokemon. And it is 437 characters. And then if we look at the Redux Toolkit version, 416. So you can see, not only are you saving lines of code, you're saving your character count. You're typing less, you're writing less code for everything that you do. And that's not the only perk. The other perk is readability. So let's go ahead and take a look at these reducers. So in vanilla Redux, your reducer is going to look something like this. Usually you have a switch statement, you have cases, which are going to be using your constants that you import in here, and you are going to take in some data. Maybe you'll destructure it off the action here, and then you'll return a state object typically, and you have to write everything in an immutable way. Because you have to write quite a few lines of code, usually just to duplicate things, like over here, and like spread operators and things like that. And you're going to have to do a lot of duplication to keep things immutable, which is like one of the pillars of Redux and functional programming in general. Whereas in Redux Toolkit, you can tell right away that this is a lot more readable. So every single reducer in vanilla Redux over here, it takes up almost the entire page. It takes up more than the entire page here. And all of this same logic here is right here in half a page, right? And it's a lot more readable everything looks just like a function now, and you basically take in the state and your action the same way that you would over here, state, action, right? Except now you get to write things. There's a few benefits. Like, one is all of the reducer logic as well as the initial state is all kind of in one condensed slice, right? It's even called CreateSlice. And I'll get into the other benefits here, but you get to write it in an immutable, you get to write it in a mutable way. So you get to write it, I'm using functions like push in here, right? State.pokemon.push, a higher order array function. And normally you can't do that in Redux logic because it would mutate your state and cause bugs and issues. And but because I'm using Redux Toolkit under the hood, at the very beginning when you would be setting up your middleware, typically you would import different libraries. One of the most popular ones is the immer. Sorry about the phone ringing, guys. One of the most popular libraries is the immer library, which basically allows you to write your code as if it was mutable, like .push and stuff like that, and it will actually convert that into immutable code under the hood. So it'll turn .push into this logic right here, essentially, where I had to duplicate the state, and then I had to add the new name onto it and create a new Pokemon array and then set the old one to the new one and blah, 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 blah. So it's kind of hard to read and reason about, whereas this is a lot more simple. I'm just literally pushing Pokemon onto the end of a existing array. Very easy to reason about. So that's another benefit. And one of the huge benefits, as you notice at the beginning of the original Redux version, I have to make all these action constants, as well as a bunch of, I have to import all those constants, and I have to use ActionCreators to fetch them. And I don't even know if I put that in here, actually. That's okay, yeah, no, here's the ActionCreators. So, but these are thunks. These are all thunks. So I haven't even, whatever, let's just focus on, I probably should have went over this a little bit harder before I did this, but this is all kind of on the cuff because there needs to be at least one video out there kind of explaining the benefits of Redux Toolkit. So one of the other huge benefits of Redux Toolkit is the CreateSlice function here automatically generates all of the actions and types that you need. So right here, I export toggle loading. Oh, well, here's some things that I can eliminate because that's actually not even in the other. There's another line of code saved. So we're exporting the dot actions here. And what that does for us is it automatically generates action creators. And when we want to do something like dispatch an action later on in our program, the dispatch code is a little bit easier to reason about because we don't have to import all these action creators in from a secondary file in in the traditional Redux fashion. And so you're saving time because you're not writing all these action creators. You're saving time because you're not having to write immutable logic, although you would have already saved that time if you're using the immer library anyway. You're saving just tons and tons of characters, so you're writing less lines of code, less characters of code, and it's a lot more readable. And then what you do is, instead of following this pattern where you have your constants in one file, your action creators in another file, your reducers in another file, and then your your store and all of that, it looks a little bit different. It follows something called the ducks pattern, right? So in a typical Redux application, you'd be familiar with seeing perhaps a Redux folder, sometimes not. And in that Redux folder, or related to the Redux logic, you would see a actions folder, you'd see a reducers folder, you'd see a separate constants JS file, and as you can see here, all we really have is a folder called features, configure store, and a root reducer, and that's it. So there are, everything's kind of condensed, and it's much easier to find what you're looking for. So like for one example, what we were looking at is what I call the Pokey API slice. And that's just kind of the suggested naming, is you add the word slice to the end of it, because that's kind of like a slice of state, if you can visualize that. And all of the reducer logic, here's the official file with all the comments and everything and all the newer logic. Everything is located in one central place. So, to some developers, they don't like that. They like having everything separated out. And so you can do it in whatever pattern you want. But one of the suggested patterns, if you're using Redux Toolkit, is the Dux pattern. And it really does help, in my opinion, to consolidate all your logic. And so you see I'm exporting my actions. At the bottom, I'm exporting all of my thunks. And then another cool thing is, because all of the actions are exported and generated by the CreateSlice function here, when I go to dispatch those, I just literally dispatch toggle loading. And it's as if I had written all of that typical action creator logic that you would see, where you'd have to dispatch an action that has a type and a payload and all of that. Well, let me see if I can find you an example. Because now, instead of doing all of that, let me just go into the components here. We'll go to the Pokemon grid component, and I'll find you an example. Yeah, like right here, dispatch remove from team, right? Like, so typically this remove from team would be an action creator that's stored in a separate file that has a type and a payload and all of that. And you'd have to send it the type. So it'd be like remove from team type, comma, and then the payload would be this p.name thing that we're looking at, which is the Pokemon name in this example. And so now this is all just kind of being automatically generated by the toolkit inside of this. So as you structure everything in this little object that gets passed into the CreateSlice function, it looks through everything that's in the reducers, and it generates types and it generates actions automatically for you. And then you export those actions down here, and then you're done, right? So it's so much easier. Everybody really, especially beginners going into it, myself included, it's just like, oh man, why am I writing all these separate files? Half of the battle really is like, where do I put all of this logic? Like, okay, I have my action creator, then I have the actual action, then I have the reducer, then I have the store, and then let's not even get started hooking it all up. Once you get it on there, you still have to hook it up to your app. And so let's go into that. Now, this isn't like an official part of Redux Toolkit. In fact, this is actually part of React Redux. So, of course, yeah, I probably should have mentioned at the very beginning that this is all React. But this still does apply to, if you're just using Redux with another framework. So let's see, if I'm in my Pokemon grid component here, and I am looking for, let's see. Okay, yeah, so I have my dispatch. So this isn't, like I said, it's not an official part. It's actually React Redux. And so use Selector and use dispatch were recommended in the Redux Toolkit official documentation. And so I tried that out instead of doing the typical map dispatch to props, map state to props, and connect, right? Which is, listen to that mouthful already. Even just saying it out loud, it's more, versus use Selector and use dispatch. And so these hooks are very, very convenient, right? So I do const dispatch equals use dispatch, and then I can just literally dispatch any of these actions that are generated by my CreateSlice function. So all of these actions here, such as Pokemon names, Pokemon details, API error, and etc., can now be used by just saying dispatch and whatever that function is, get first render or whatever it may be. In this case, this is a thunk, and it's exported at the bottom. So, and then when I want to get state, instead of having to do a map dispatch to props, map state to props, and then have a huge list of props up here that I'm importing into the component that are coming from the bottom where I'm mapping it all, instead of doing that, an easier way is to just use Selector, right? And so what this does is it goes to the quote unquote slice of state, which I call poke team in this example, and it grabs the poke team array and the favorite Pokemon array from state, and the state is called poke team. Whereas like normally you'd have a separate reducer for that, and I do in here called features poke team slice, and then it's just the same thing all over again, where I'm doing a create slice. Here's my poke team array that I was importing. Here's the favorite Pokemon array that I'm importing. And it just makes everything a lot easier to reason about. So I know that's kind of like a crash course. And of course, I didn't like go into like how this exact application works. If people are interested, I can do a write-up on this program, and I can show you guys how poke team was put together. It's all done with Redux Toolkit. Here's what it looks like in action. So it's doing the initial render here, which normally is a lot quicker. And it's basically hooked up. Let me show you one other cool feature is Redux Dev Tools is built right in. So you don't have to do any importing of middleware and finagling to get it wired up at the beginning. It just comes with Redux Dev Tools already pre-configured. So when you create your store, your Redux store, it automatically has Redux Dev Tools. And so you can just go ahead and open up this panel, and you can see that I am using Redux Persist to rehydrate the state from memory. But let's say I were to go scroll down to the bottom of the page here. It's going to go ahead and toggle loading. Then it dispatched Pokemon names, and then it dispatched Pokemon details, and it's grabbing details for every single one of those Pokemon. And I can go in and I can see exactly which one came in. So like on this one, it was Poliwhirl. First, we just had Poliwhirl's name, and now we have Poliwhirl's name plus all of his details. And then I can go into state at that exact moment in time, and I can see, okay, here's what my Pokemon array looked like. And, the latest one, 79, well, that's slow, bro, but you know what I'm saying. So you can go in here and you can see a snapshot of your state, look at only the differences from one state to the next, and you can see the raw data if you like looking at it like that instead. Like here's all the stats that came in for Poliwhirl. And so we just brought in all of that info, and he's hidden under me here. So when you click him, now that information is in state, it will go ahead and just grab that off the state object and put it into the UI here. So, we have his abilities, his description, his name, and etc. And then like if I favorite him, for example, it says poke team add favorite Pokemon, and it just added Poliwhirl to the favorite Pokemon list. And then if I add to team, same thing's going to happen. It says add to team, says Poliwhirl's now in the team object. And so you have all of this information. If you're familiar with Redux Dev Tools, you already know how awesome this is. But this comes just like built in with Redux Toolkit. So it's just everything is optimized and quick and clean and concise and readable when you're using Redux Toolkit. And it's a little bit I like personally, I'm never going to go back to writing it the quote unquote traditional way. I'm going to stick with using Redux Toolkit. And if you guys know something even better than this, because obviously there's a lot of different ways of managing your state out there, please let me know. But so far, from what I've used, this has been the cleanest, most easily understood way of handling state. And I guess I probably should have done this at the beginning, but let's go ahead and take a look at my configure store just so you can see the difference. So now this is a little bit more complex than it needs to be because I used Redux persist, and so I had to add all of this stuff right here. Normally it just looks like this. You say configure store, and you can get rid of all that too. So normally you just have configure store and get default middleware, and you don't even need to use default middleware because that happens automatically. So to get your store set up, you literally just import configure store from Redux Toolkit. You import your root reducer, and then you say config store, and you say your store equals. Now in this example, because I have a persister and I'm using Redux persist, it seems a little more complicated, but really all you're doing is like basically just this, right? I could get rid of all this, just do that. So I say const store equals configure store, export default store, right? Done. And what this does under the hood with that simple teeny tiny little bit of code is it gets you set up with Immer, it gets you set up with the Redux Dev Tools, and there's a lot of other little optimizations that are running under the hood. So all your middleware that is typically used is just already there. Everything's super easy to manage. And yeah, I recommend it 100%. So go to redux-toolkit.js.org and familiarize yourself with it. And if you want a video tutorial on it, let me know. If it's just like one person that asks for it, I'm probably not going to do it. But if I get a few people who want me to make a video write up on exactly how to use this, I'll do it, because for me, I learn a lot better through video than I do reading documentation. And this is one of the times where there was literally nothing out there. So I had to just read the documentation to figure this stuff out. And luckily, I want to give a huge shout out, by the way, to, let me pull it up on Discord. So the Reactive Flux Discord is just incredibly helpful. If you guys use Discord, you should join Reactive Flux if you're learning Redux or you want to have access to a community that's very, very helpful. One of the developers and maintainers of Redux Toolkit himself has helped me out tremendously in this process. I'm trying to find out where it is. So here's Reactive Flux, right? And then under the Redux channel, he's always in there, man. The Ace Mark, this guy, he is so helpful. He's a super nice guy, just freely giving knowledge out, answers pretty much every question that comes in. I mean, look what a good example, right? I just arbitrarily went to this at 1:04 p.m. and there he is answering somebody's question. He's a really great guy, and you don't usually get that kind of one-on-one support when you're using new libraries. So he definitely helped me wrap my head around how Immer was running under the hood. He kind of pushed for me to start using Toolkit. He was answering my Redux questions, and I'm trying to figure out all this asynchronous redux-thunk stuff for API interactions. And he's like, this could be a lot easier if you just use Toolkit. And I'm like, okay, but I'm trying to learn Redux, So I eventually switched all of my app logic for this program over to Toolkit. And like I said, I'm never going back. It's awesome. And I'm not really sure like how I would suggest it, learning it. Because the question is, like, do you just learn Redux with Toolkit from the get-go? Or do you learn Redux first and then Toolkit? And Ace Marks says you should learn Redux first and then Toolkit so that you can see why Toolkit. is so useful, and see how it's saving you time. And also because it gives you a little bit more of an idea of what's running under the hood, because you kind of have to have an understanding of like what an action creator is. You have to understand what the shape of these objects are, like payload, for example. Payload is it's always passed in with your action in Redux. And in Redux Toolkit, it's not optional. Like the word payload is just baked into it, and everything that you send to a reducer with an action creator is called a payload. And so if you want to access it, it's, action.payload or whatever. And so stuff like that, it does help if you have a working knowledge of Redux already. I'm kind of like on the fence. I don't really know. I learned Redux first, and like it took me a few weeks to like really be able to write that boilerplate from memory without having to look stuff up. It took me probably 2 weeks to get to that point where I could comfortably write Redux without any reference. And then switching to Toolkit, I just feel like I originally said to Ace Mark on here, I was like, I feel like I should have just learned Toolkit from the beginning, because now I feel like I'm unlearning stuff and relearning stuff. But in the end, I am glad that I did it the way that I did it. I just don't know if, like, for you guys, you need to do that. You might just be able to just go straight into Redux Toolkit and learn it that way, to be honest. I think but then, it's going to be magic, whereas if you learn Redux first, you'll understand how all this stuff works, and it won't be so magic to you. So that's pretty much it. Poke Team is 100% open source if you guys want to look at it. It's got infinite scrolling under the hood with a cool little loading animation. Normally, yeah, there you go. There's the little Pokeballs. There's still some optimizations I need to make. If you guys want to contribute to this project, I'd be more than happy to accept any push requests that you guys want to put out. And it's all open source and on GitHub. So github.com/Jordan Winslow/Poke Team, POKE-team. And this is the link. All open source. And you guys can go into my source folder here, and you can go into the Redux folder, and you can see how all this stuff works yourself. And you can kind of compare it, and you can see how like things like the root reducer look almost identical. There's like pretty much no difference. You're just using the combine reducers function from Toolkit instead of the combine reducers function in Redux. I'm using persist, so I have some extra stuff there to make that data easily rehydrate whenever they shut down their computer and whatnot, so that I never have to do an API request twice. And just a features folder. Whereas when I did the first draft of this, let me go ahead and show you. I know I'm kind of rambling on, but if you're still here, then you're probably interested. So in Toolkit, I just have a features folder. In the first draft of this program, when I was using just traditional Redux, let me show you what that looked like. So that same Redux folder that just had a features folder in it, now doing it the other way, you've got actions, types, and reducers all separated out. And it's just kind of like hard to keep track of everything. And then I was using sagas for this particular thing. I decided thunks were a little bit more simple. Sagas are for super, super complex applications. And but that's another topic. Sagas, by the way, if you are familiar, are compatible with Redux Toolkit. Redux Toolkit is just Redux with opinions and a lot of helper functions that make things way quicker. So, that's pretty much it, I guess. So feel free to contribute to the Pokemon team, the Poke Team project, or to just look at the code. And feel free to join the Reactive Flux Discord. I go there anytime I have questions on Redux or advanced questions that I can't get answers to elsewhere, and of course go to redux-toolkit.js.org so that you can learn this powerful software, and maybe people will stop hating on Redux so much. I mean, honestly, I can totally see that. When I first started learning Redux, I actually made a few social media posts making fun of it. Coming, especially like for simple applications, you just got to use kind of, I don't know if common sense is the right word, but you just have to get a feeling for when it's appropriate to use Redux and other state management solutions. For small applications that are really tiny and only have a couple functions, smaller than even my Pokédex application here. Just stick with hooks. Just use state. It's easy. And but if you're passing state more than 2 levels deep, I think it's time to start breaking out something else like the context API or Redux. And since Redux Toolkit makes Redux way easier to use, it is much more feasible now for you to have a mid-sized project that isn't super complicated. And so you're like, well, why would I need Redux if it's not super complicated? Well, because it's got time travel debugging. It's got this incredible extension, this Chrome extension, Redux Dev Tools, just absolutely phenomenal for debugging. And it helps you kind of like manage all of your logic and think about things in a cohesive way that makes it easier to understand, both for you and the people reading the code. And so now you can use it for mid-sized projects without having to write a ton of boilerplate and stuff like that. Just CreateSlice and you're practically done, guys. So yeah, give it a shot. Check it out. That's about it. Sorry for rambling on so long. Sorry it wasn't super structured, but hopefully this at least gets you to want to check it out. And like I said, if you want a video tutorial, I will make one. But you have to comment. You have to let me know. And it has to be more than just a couple people. If only like 2 people say